So I told you that one of the things they'll do when patients have cholera is measure the amount of fluid a patient has lost. They literally have the patients defecate into that bucket. I mean, I don't think the patient has much of a choice. They're so exhausted. They're so worn out. They just kind of lay them there and things happen. So what's important is to replace the fluids the patient has lost. And so the best therapy for cholera is not antibiotics. It's actually rehydration therapy. And you don't give pure water because remember, you can die of water intoxication. So if you drink too much just plain water and don't get the ions back, you lose the ability to have nerve impulses. Your nerves, they need ions and water to function. So if a patient is dehydrated, you don't want them to chug water. You want them to have fluid with like electrolytes. Gatorade is like an example. Of course, for rehydrating somebody that has cholera, it's a little more scientific than Gatorade, but it's a rehydration therapy. You want to try to give the patient back as much fluid as they have lost. That loss of gallons of fluid causes extreme dehydration, but we also have those unbalanced levels of electrolytes and other ions. Antibiotics are not effective because a patient will die before antibiotics would start to work. So that rehydration therapy of a carefully balanced, measured fluid solution is key. Oh, I spoiled myself. Antibiotics are ineffective because patients will die of diarrhea before the antibiotics can work. There are some cholera vaccines available, but their effectiveness decreases over time. So it might be one of those where patients would have to get like a booster vaccine. The cost is relatively low though. So, we have to think about, I saw a headline not that long ago that Mexico was raising the minimum wage. And, in the US, the minimum wage, like federal minimum wage, is something like, $7.25 an hour. And so if, let's say you work in a state that pays the bare minimum wage, $7.25 an hour times 8 hours a day, you'd make $58 a day. In California, the minimum wage is almost $16 an hour. So let's say $16 an hour, 8 hours a day, you'd make $128 a day. That's minimum wage. In Mexico, the minimum wage is going to be raised to $14.25 a day. So a lot of countries, $4 sounds like it's pretty trivial for us, but for them, it's not. In some countries, that could be a day's wages. So it's really important to have low-cost, effective vaccines for countries that don't have the same economic standing that maybe the US or European countries might have. Now, people weren't sure how cholera spread. They thought it was caused by bad air. Everything is caused by bad air. No, it's not everything's caused by bad air. But the confirmation of the fact that it was a waterborne infection came in 1854. Jon Snow, not of Game of Thrones fame. This is the father of epidemiology, Jon Snow, was looking at this outbreak of cholera in London. And at the time, there was not indoor plumbing. So if you wanted water for your home, you went to a well. And all of the wells are shown with these X's, or this one looks like a plus sign, but I think they're supposed to be X's. The green dots represent people who died of cholera. And what he noticed was that all these people that died of cholera, there was a huge concentration of them that lived near this pump on Broad Street. And so he determined that it was most likely this contaminated well that was causing the disease. So he removed the well handle so nobody could pump water from that well anymore. And that ended the outbreak of cholera in this area. And it turned out that the well had been dug 3 feet from a cesspit, basically where people defecate or dump their waste. A lot of times, again, no indoor plumbing. You might use a chamber pot. So in the home, you'd have a pot that you could then empty into something like a cesspit. And 3 feet is not a lot of distance between your drinking water and your poopy water. And so the bacteria could and did get into the water supply. So again, the bacterium was isolated in 1854, but nobody really paid attention. A scientist called Robert Koch, he'll come up a lot. We're going to talk about him a lot. Definitively identified the bacterium as the agent of cholera disease. There was another scientist who did not believe Koch. Scientists are funny like that. They get big egos. And so he drank some cholera. Don't ever drink cholera. It's kind of I know seems like duh. But he drank it and he got sick. You think? But he had a more mild disease. So he thought it wasn't cholera. I don't know. You got a bunch of diarrhea after drinking cholera. You probably got cholera, but that's just me. Then he made his assistant drink some. Don't ever work for a scientist who will make you drink cholera. The assistant also got sick. Shocking. But they didn't have like that massive, like gallons of diarrhea a day. So they were kind of fussy, like, oh, it's not cholera. But the scientist who gave them the culture did not give them like superpower cholera. He gave them a more weakened strain. So of course they didn't get as sick. So then everybody believed Koch. They're like, okay, it's this bacterium. We know how it's spread, the fecal-oral route. And what we saw was that in countries that were able to have improved sanitation, which sometimes people call them developed countries. I know that's not the preferred term, but I know it's a term that probably most of you are familiar with. Basically, the idea of improved sanitation is the idea that people in the city, the state, the country are able to access drinking water that has not been in contact with human feces. And again, I know that sounds like obviously, but in some parts of the world, they don't have indoor plumbing. They don't have an option where they get their water. They have one water source. It's the same water source where you wash your clothes, you get your drinking water, you take a bath. So fecal bacteria get in there. And if somebody has cholera, that gets in the water. And then everybody has to drink that water. So in areas of the world where we don't have that problem, we don't usually see a lot of cholera. During outbreaks, you would keep your children home from school. And what we tend to see, regardless of how people feel about the government, is we tend to see that when the government gets involved in public health, that helps to decrease disease spread. So when the government steps in and says, hey, you know what? There's cholera going around. Everybody should stay home. Let's work on improving the sanitation because everybody's drinking poopy water. Let's fix that so people aren't drinking poop water anymore. That works out really well. And so again, I know during the pandemic, we can kind of, bring this to modern times. People got real fussy when the government's saying, hey, we're going to close all these businesses because this whole disease is spreading. Hey, we're going to tell you should wear a mask or that you have to wear a mask because this disease is spreading. That's what stops diseases from spreading. So regardless of whether or not you feel like it was government overreach, it still stops the disease from spreading as much as it did. So this is, a city tale from Germany. Hamburg, Germany persisted in postponing costly improvements, didn't want to do it, drew the water from the river without treatment. Next door was a town called Altona, where the government installed a water filtration plant. In 1892, cholera broke out in Hamburg. It ran down one side of the street that divided the two cities and spared the other completely. So the city that had a water filtration plant, no cholera. City that was like, cholera. Surprise. Doubters were silenced, and cholera has in fact never returned to European cities thanks to systematic purification of urban water supplies from bacteriological contamination. Clean your water. Clean your water, you won't get cholera. But again, this is not, it's something that's easy for me to say. Well, clean your water, you won't get cholera. Yeah. That's not why I'm the professor of the class, because I know obvious facts. But I do know obvious facts. But here's the challenge. There are over 2 billion people on the planet. Over 1/3 of the world's population, if we assume 7 billion, doesn't have basic sanitation. Over 2 billion people, so less than 1/3, drink fecally contaminated water because they don't have a choice. That is their water. So these issues, even though it sounds like old-timey 1800s issues, these are day-to-day issues for huge populations worldwide. So the modern distribution of cholera, this is data I gathered from the World Health Organization from so I kind of filtered it down here. This says 2000 to 2022, but I filtered the data. So these data are from 2020 to 2022. There were still over 1 million cases of cholera worldwide, over 7,000 deaths. So it's a case fatality rate of 0.7%. So just under 1% of people who get cholera die from it. That's about the same rate as COVID. COVID's a little bit higher, but not much. This word here, this funny word up here, this means locally acquired cases. So all of these countries had cholera. And then 906 imported cases, meaning people got cholera in another country and then traveled home. So these were all of the countries from 2020 to 2022 that had cases of cholera diagnosed. Okay, there were none in the Western Hemisphere this time. Okay, so modern distribution of cholera. In February of 1991, 45,000 Peruvians came down with cholera. So it's not like the Western Hemisphere is immune. We were just lucky the past few years. By March, that number, so in 1 month, had gone up to 175,000. So the Peruvian health ministry was like, yeah, you probably shouldn't eat raw fish. And that's because a lot of the shoreline in Peru was contaminated with sewage. So then the fish had the bacteria, or the shellfish had the bacteria. The president got on TV, he ate raw fish, said it was safe. His fish was caught out at sea, away from the sewage contamination. The Peruvian minister of fisheries, he did the same thing, got on TV, ate raw fish, said it was safe, but he got cholera because he didn't get fish from far away. He got fish that was close. Okay, so, don't believe everything you see on TV because you never know what the background is. So again, the Western Hemisphere, we are not immune from cholera. We just were lucky the past few years. So there was a massive earthquake in Haiti in January of 2010. And following that, there was the influx of a lot of aid workers from especially the Red Cross. And many of them had just come from Nepal. And it turned out that the Red Cross workers from Nepal had cholera. I'm not saying that the Red Cross workers were like Nepalese by background. They were Red Cross workers who had previously been working in Nepal and probably picked up cholera there, and then came to Haiti, established their camp, and then starting downstream from the camp, people started turning up with cholera. Nearly 800,000 people in Haiti got cholera. You can see it was spread throughout the country with 9,000 deaths. And even though the outbreak started in 2010, patients were still recorded through January of 2019 as getting cholera. And kind of most recently, there's been a massive outbreak in Yemen. It started in October of 2016, and it went through, the last patient was diagnosed in approximately November of 2021. So that's about a 5-year span of cholera in Yemen. 2.5 million cases, approximately 4,000 deaths. And Yemen actually had water sanitation, not a problem. Cholera was not really an issue in Yemen, but there was a civil war, and that led to destruction of some of the water and sanitation systems. So when you have these types of conflicts that cause infrastructure collapse, you then have the risk of infectious disease in the population. These are some cases that were diagnosed in the US in 2008. We had a little kind of cluster of people in the US. Again, a lot of them were, so there's a guy in Illinois, but he's a resident of Pakistan. So he probably got it in Pakistan. That's the assumption that the CDC works under. In Oregon, there was a patient who had traveled in Nepal and Hong Kong. New Jersey, a patient who traveled in India. Texas, a patient who traveled in the Philippines. But then these are the ones that are a little bit more troublesome. Domestic seafood in Louisiana, self-harvest. So this woman caught her own seafood in Louisiana and got sick. This person, they don't know where exactly he caught his food, but domestic seafood. New Jersey, domestic seafood that was harvested from New Jersey. Maybe not by him, but by somebody. Domestic seafood, domestic recreational water exposure. So in parts of the country, especially that have warm water like the Gulf, Louisiana and Texas, it's more likely to see these infections. And when I was a doctoral student, I did my PhD in Texas, in San Antonio, and the lab next to mine was a lab that studied cholera. And so they would go periodically down to the Rio Grande, which is the river that is the border between the US and Mexico in that part of the country. And they would sample and test the river, the Rio Grande, for cholera. And they found it every time. So the bacterium is there. It's a matter of exposure, infectious dose, how much of the bacterium is there. So there is cholera in the United States. It's just a matter of people acquiring the infection. So the biggest risk factor is poor sanitation. So even though there's cholera bacteria in the Rio Grande, why do we not have cholera in the US or even in Mexico? Because we have decent sanitation. I know that there's always this like, oh, don't drink the water in Mexico. And yeah, you're not supposed to drink the water in Mexico. But it used to be like, don't brush your teeth with the water in Mexico. But a lot of places now have much better sanitation where you can brush your teeth. You can take a shower. If the water gets in your mouth, you'll probably be okay. They still don't recommend, chugging tap water. But the levels of contamination are much better than they used to be, and they're getting better all the time in Mexico. They're really improving the infrastructure. And in the US, we have a solid infrastructure. So that's why we don't see as many infections as we theoretically could. Contact with other patients, right? Once that person is shedding all of that bacteria in their feces, like that rice water stool is just chock full of bacteria, just billions of bacteria. Having reduced stomach acid, so if you're malnourished, children, or if you've just eaten a big meal, that can temporarily raise your stomach acid pH, lower the amount of stomach acid you have. Type O blood, that one I think is a little bit weird. And as a type O blood person, I'm a little bit like, okay, just, stay away from the Rio Grande. And of course, raw or undercooked shellfish. I mean, that's going to be a trend that we'll see throughout the class. Cook your food. Just cook your food. Cook your food. Cook your food. Especially if it's like an animal product. Cook your food. So cook your food.